I am Laura Sipe, the Interim Director for Strategic Engagement and Alumni Relations for the College of Engineering, and it's my job to welcome you today to our Engineering Elections, the Science Behind the Voting Process presentation. The college, during the past few months, we've been piloting quite a few different virtual activities and programs. And I know some of you have joined us from our very first virtual events, the Dean's Roadshow earlier this summer, where Dean Williams shared the latest news from the college. And we had some of our best faculty and staff researchers talking about how they are directly impacting the fight against COVID-19, all the way to our most recent and first ever virtual 5K, where I know some of you today were here for that and helped us raise over $3,300 for the college's emergency scholarship fund for students. We're really thrilled with that participation. And we're also thrilled to be able to kick off our new fall series of virtual events with today's session. So before we get underway, I wanted to let you know, I believe we're having a little bit of an issue with our closed captioning services. We are working on that behind the scenes. Hopefully that will be able to come on board during the presentation. And if you do need access to those services, we will make sure to provide a copy of this video after the event with the captions intact. So I apologize for that inconvenience. I also want to let you know that we will be taking questions from the audience. I want to make sure to thank those of you who sent in your questions in advance. I know Dr. Allen is excited to dig into those in the second half of our presentation today, but there's going to be plenty of time. So if you think of something that you would like to bring up, please enter that using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. I also just want to give you a little bit of a heads up that we couldn't have an election event without a little bit of audience participation polls. So please pay attention throughout the presentation. We will pop up a few of these polls and gauge your interest, knowledge, awareness of some of the things that Dr. Allen is going to talk about. So without further ado, I am excited to introduce Dr. Theodore Allen, who is an associate professor in the Integrated Systems Engineering Department, and he's also a member of the MIT Election Lab. Dr. Allen, welcome.
Thank you, Laura. I'm just turning on my video. It says here, you cannot start it because it's stopped. So let's turn on my video. Oh, here it goes, start my video. So yeah, my name's Ted Allen. Truth is, I know a lot of you. I've been checking the attendees, and I'm really glad that a lot of people that I know and like, including my mom, have come to watch this. And so I will be presenting about election systems. And I've come to know quite a bit about election systems, although there are some people that definitely know a lot more, particularly the election officials themselves. So let me switch. Oh, I see what you do. Let me switch and you can see my screen. There we go. So the work that I'm presenting today is election stories and my experiences and teamwork for projects that I've done. A lot of them here with Franklin County with the nice Board of Elections officials. I'd like to thank you, Laura, for asking me to do this. And the people that I've worked with are listed here as well. And I'll talk more about some of them. The employers that I've been employed with, including Matt Damschroeder, if he came, he would definitely know a lot more. Dale Ho is a very famous person from the ACLU. He knows a lot about elections, and some of the others as well. Really, maybe the most important thing are the students that have worked with me underneath the Board of Elections here. So I'll be presenting a lot of their work as well. And I was checking to see if any of those students had come, and I haven't seen them yet. But so I've already been introduced, so I won't go through my bio, but I am a pretty applied person. I do a lot of applications. We've had some big success with DHL this year. I'm pretty excited about that, saving quite a lot of money. But I guess I'm here to say that, you know, election work is mostly low compensated work, and but valuable work, we think. And I am representing the MIT Election Laboratory and the Stanford Healthy Elections Project. And really all of us professors, you know, we don't get a lot of grants for doing this type of work, but we think it's important. So this is the overview of all the slides I'm going to go through. It's about 24, so we're already getting through it. They started back in 2004 with a disastrous election that we had here in Franklin County. I'll tell that story, and we'll ask you some questions about how you think it would have been resolved. Then some applications I did building on the work that things I learned from that, and some pretty exciting court cases, one where Democrats messed over Republicans, and then one where Republicans really messed over Democrats. And then talk about student projects, redesigning things, somewhat controversial work that I did here in the state of Ohio, where I feel a little guilty perhaps, although there's some defending points as well. And then more student projects and getting to vote by mail. And I'll ask you some questions about that. So the first project I ever did in election systems, I went to the American Statistical Association, the great annual conference they have, and the presenter was this president at the time, Fritz Schuyen, and he said, my gosh, elections are really close, and then they could be decided, and the margin from the election system itself might be 1 or 2%. And so the details of the election process are quite important, and they're actually a lot more complicated. And I think you'll gain some appreciation for how complicated they are as we go through the presentation. So if you want to help, come and talk to me. And I'll make that same promise to you today that if you're, some of you have already come and you're already helping, I shouldn't mention them, but if others want to be involved, there's a lot of things to do. And so the way I got it, so I said, I'm willing to help, I'm here. And he said, my gosh, good news. Our first project is actually right where you live. So you can just bicycle over there. And this gentleman, Steve Hertzberg, sued your government in Franklin County, and they've settled, and they will hire you to do work helping Franklin County. So that was the first project. It was kind of a coincidence, really. And they had over 5-hour lines. They had Black people waiting 30 minutes more than white people on average, according to a reputable source. So the first question I have for you is what happened and how to fix it? And so, Laura, if you would start up that question, let's see what this group can come up with. Laura? There it is. So which of the following is the main cause of unequal lines at polling places in Ohio back in 2004? Still a cause now. Unequal education levels, different ballots, voting methods, or on differing ballot lengths. I know some of you are aware of the answer to this, but probably many of you might not. Let's see what you come up with.
Thanks, Ted. We're just waiting for the answers to roll in.
Okay, good.
So hopefully everybody, I'm seeing these answers coming in. It looks like you're seeing these polls, you're paying attention, you're making your voice heard. That's exactly what we need during this election season. We're going to give it just a few more seconds, and then we'll close the poll and share the results. Okay, here are the results.
Okay, well, I had just taught a course in waiting line analysis when I did this. So it's like I prepared and then I went to the place, and the answer is differing ballot lengths. And I guessed that immediately because I first found out that they have very different ballot lengths here in Franklin County. I'll show you a plot in a minute. No, the whole county uses the same voting method, thank goodness. Although this election, it's kind of complicated because there's many modes. You can vote early. So I guess you could say it's different voting method, but not at the same time. They vote by mail, then you vote in person on the same machines, and then you vote in your precinct on the same machine. So it's uniform at any given time. So the answer is this. So see this plot. So allocations of DRE machines, they were proportional, and they still are proportional. We've sort of failed to get the whole world to change. And we're trying to make software. I'm giving away software. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the truth is that people keep allocating machines and booths proportional to the number of likely voters. So some locations are given 11 extra initiatives and others have 0. So here you can see that all the places, this is when the poll closed. And so if you're running the queue in overload condition, the lines are longest at the end of the day. So not entirely, but almost always. And so some of them were closing 5 hours late. So they don't let you leave. The last person who comes in at 7:30, they'd say, okay, that's the last person. then that line is allowed to stay until it votes, but no one else is allowed to enter. So this is actually a measure of the line length, and it turns out that all the places with the long ballots had really long lines. And so in a way, you could say it wasn't obvious racism that was involved, although it turns out that the Black people were living in the places with longer ballots. So if they had understood this, and I don't think they did, then it could have been intentional, but I don't think it was. So because this is actually a common practice all around the world. Turnouts were actually less in the places that had the long lines. So people might have said, turnout. I didn't ask that, but people might have said turnout. But it turns out that actually, no pun intended, that the fewer people vote in places where there are long lines because the lines were caused by the unequal ballot lengths. And then the allocations didn't take that into account. So, okay, so then Laura, could you ask the second question, please?
Sure, let me bring it up just one moment here.
So which of these techniques that hopefully you all know and love, but I know at least one person doesn't, might apply and be helpful to answer this question? These are techniques that you can learn in our great courses, and some of you will never forget because you love them so much.
So we're just looking at the numbers coming in. We'll give this maybe another 30 seconds to weigh in. Hopefully this is bringing back some memories of your time here on campus, as Ted was saying in some of the classes you got to take here. Responses are definitely coming in.
Okay.
Okay, let's go ahead and share these results. Let's see what people think.
Okay, so this was a trick question. All of them could be applied. For this narrow problem right here, waiting line analysis and simulation optimization and queuing theory are definitely great fits, I think. Queuing theory is the one you picked the most. We're going to talk about that next. But in some of the later projects, we'll talk about optimal layout, human factors, cost analysis, different things like that. So nice job, you're all right, and I think you picked the right one for this one. So, all right, so here's queuing theory. So basically queuing theory, this is just a steady state queuing result. What it says is that the waiting time is a function both of the arrival rate, which has to do with how many people are in the location, and don't forget the service rate, which has to do with the ballot length. So if you make the ballots twice as long to fill out, then you basically need C to be twice as long to keep it the same. So in other words, if you make the ballot lengths twice as long, the service rate is half as long, it's half as fast, and so then you need more machines there. So it makes sense that if you're working at Honda and one line takes twice as long to fill it, the machines are twice as slow as others, then if you want to keep it equal, you put twice as many machines of that kind. But people don't think that way even now, and that's been kind of my big issue. That I've been involved with other issues as well, but this is an important issue, and so waiting lines depend on both the ballot length and the arrival rate. And so this is just a steady state approximation. So it might be more reasonable to do simulation optimization, because then you can take into account that waiting lines are only, they form in the morning. It's a day-long election. It's not infinite. And we don't just care about steady state, and we can have machines breaking down, and we can have rush periods. And so steady state might not be a good approximation, but it's something, and it gives intuition. So we've also put some free software. I put some free software that you could use with some of my colleagues we've made, and we're trying to get people to use it really. It's a little slow, and so we're trying to speed it up. Then after this, I did a bunch of projects in Franklin County and Cuyahoga County and Onondaga County in New York State, where we applied the software to try to shorten and even out the lines. And it kind of worked. Of course, when you have a success, then nobody notices because everybody kind of expects there won't be super long lines. It's only the failures that people notice, but that's life. So some machines naturally take longer than others to vote on. That was another thing we learned. was if you actually time people on different machines, you wouldn't think, oh, more machines better, but not if the machines take forever to use. So like actually the old machines that had the problem in 2004 were actually really fast to vote on. That's what this shows. Because they were open faced, you could go bing, 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 bing. Oh, I don't care about the judges, whatever. That. Whereas the new machines, you have to go all the way through the whole thing, and it takes about twice as long. And if you undervote, they're like, "What are you doing? You're undervoting." So the point is that all takes more time. And so, so I did projects. We did this application. I wrote a textbook too, and then we found out that there's quite a bit of difference. And then I did a simulation in my book where we tried to analyze the different effects of different things that people did. And I think this is really an important story for Ohio right now. So some things were making lines worse in 2006, and that was these slower machines. Actually, you can see it over here on the right. So the longer ballots, they actually had longer ballots again. Then they had this compliant machines for handicapped people, but it didn't just be handicap compliant doesn't mean you have to make it take forever, but they did. And so that was a huge problem. But fortunately, they doubled the number of machines and they opened vote by mail. And they had early voting too, in person. So, and that's the point I want to mention, that Republicans maybe deserve right now a pretty bad beef for being kind of suppressors of voting. But actually, it was our current governor back when he was in the state house, and our current lieutenant governor, who together got the law passed that actually made it a lot easier to vote by opening vote by mail and early voting in person. So, and New York State doesn't have those things. And so I just want to mention that Republicans are not always the problem, and we should respect it when they do good things, I think. And I try to remember that. So then I actually, to rub that point in, I then got a job working in New Mexico, trying to analyze an election that they had had. And this was a case of Democrats in Sandoval County, where Rio Rancho is Breaking Bad people. They inflicted long lines on the Rio Rancho Republicans, and it changed the elections. So that's the opposite of what a lot of people think. Lines were so long, our regressions, if you look at this plot, it indicates that the lines caused a lot of fewer people to vote who would have voted Republican, and then they had a party, and so so that was definitely when you disenfranchise a bunch of people, don't have a party right afterwards if you don't want to get sued. So then I got it brought in, and I was supposed to go through their calculations, and I found a ton of errors that they'd made. And that's why they did it. That's how, I mean, it's possible they were being willful, but it's more likely they just made some mistakes. And then there was this expert named Lana, who's pretty famous and in that area. And she was very dismissive of my work, which I thought was foolish because that was good work. And then we had two lawsuits, and the other guy with me, Eric, he was an expert at teaching reproducible research, which basically is ways not to make mistakes when you do research. And he made a mistake. Remind me never to teach a course of reproducible research, because then you're going to make a big mistake. He had a sign wrong in one of his calculations, and Lana found it, and they just lost the whole lawsuit. So, but I didn't make any mistakes, at least not anyone found. And also the lawyers were terrific. They were very excited, and they managed to turn Lana to make all the points for our side. So between my work and Lana, their lawyers' work, we won the case. And we didn't get a new election, which we possibly could have gotten, but that was because of Eric's fault. So, I then got a job working for the Democrats on maybe the biggest election case in my career so far in New Mexico, which was in North Carolina. That was a big case. And if you want to, that's a really exciting history. I mean, really, probably books have been written about this case, not my part, but the overall case. Basically, what happened was the North Carolinians in the 2000s got it in their head that they didn't want to be the lowest turnout place or one of the lowest. They wanted to be good. And so they made it easier to vote. And actually, they've run the entire, unlike what we do here, we have one location. They have a ton of locations. They're still doing it. And so they basically run election day or almost election day for multiple days before election day. And a lot more people started voting there. But then the bad part was for them, I guess, is that they started voting more Democratic. So they were like, they made it easier to vote, and they got burned. And then they had that Shelby Commission court case, and so then they were like, oh, good, we can discriminate now. So there's all this records of them getting super excited when they got this, and they just put in these racist laws. And so our side, I work for the NAACP and the League of Women Voters, and we sued them. But at the same time, Florida had a bad election, and that allowed me to double check my rule that 4% of people drop out every hour you make them wait. And it was almost the same in Florida as it had been in Ohio. So I used that in the case, and so just that simple little regression that you just saw. And so working for the NAACP and with the great Charles Stewart, who's our leader at MIT, who's a political science professor, I did a regression to try to estimate using Stewart data, but I had an alternative, but Dale Ho said, oh, let's use Charles Stewart's thing. Famous mistake. I think if you ever get to be an expert witness, don't put all your eggs in one basket, because then the judge voided Carl Stewart's thing. And so all my work on this water flow, queuing approximation, and then the 4% rule was thrown out. And I think it's possible that Tillis, who's running right now and might not make it, won partly because of that racist law that got struck down. So even though my stuff was thrown out, our side did actually win, and the law was actually thrown away. So it was sort of a good story. All right, so that's basically halfway through, but really more than halfway. The rest is sort of quicker projects. So then I came back, I was doing my job here at OSU, teaching my class, and I teach a capstone class, and we send these students out, and the Board of Elections has been one of our best sponsors, really, maybe our best or one of the best. And these great students here, Kirk and Kelly, they went out there in the first project I can remember we did, and they did this project where they tried to make it easier to vote early. And the way they did it was, they did our normal thing where we do a process flow diagram looking for wastes and ways to eliminate things. And this is in the early voting system that's running right now, or actually it's running now. And so this is actually, they then came up with a new layout for the early voting system that I think they're using right now. And then they also simulated the whole thing. And they basically came up with new trade-offs that they could reduce staffing on days. Because there's a bunch of days. That's one of the weird things, is that you get these terrible lines, and then they put a big guardian. I'll show you that in a minute. But then there's a whole lot of days when no one comes. And it's just kind of not days, but there's some times when it's very slow. And so there's a question about how to save a little bit of money, possibly. So then I did a lawsuit, and I had a choice. This, I have to say, I think this is I find this story very interesting. So the Democratic Party offered to hire me to sue my boss's boss here in Ohio. And I thought about that, and I decided that I was still grateful to them for making it so much easier to vote here and saving our thing, that I didn't feel like I should sue my own boss's boss, and or more bosses actually. And then, so then I decided that I wouldn't work for the Democrats. And then I just thought, okay, I was grateful. Then I said, why don't you work with the guy I work with all the time, Moore Yang? I love that guy. And I still love that guy. And they said, okay, well, I had Moore Yang. So they hired Moore Yang. I was still meeting with him all the time. And then the Republicans asked me to work for them. So I thought about it, and I thought, okay, I guess I'll do it. And partly because I was hoping, I'm still hoping, that the state of Ohio will, if we get our act together, we can get software and lead on a lot of issues. And I think we can, but it's just, this is one we're all busy. And so the thing is that, so then I worked for the Republicans against my buddy. So we were meeting and then competing against each other on this lawsuit, and I won. And that's why we only have one location, you could say. I mean, it wasn't just me. I mean, our team won. And so then the Guardian has this thing here that says that I guess you could say I'm the face of voter suppression, which is kind of annoying. But and I feel a little guilty about this, honestly. I think that what I did was, and the lawyers on the other side could have asked me a lot of questions that they didn't ask me. And my buddy Moore could have pushed in a lot of ways that he didn't push. But I mean, it wasn't my job to make their case. But it is definitely true that if you take the same resources and put them in multiple places, it'll make the lines even worse. But if you had more locations and more resources, that would have been better. And if they had asked me that, they could have basically got me to make their point for them, but they didn't do that. And that's a big issue, by the way. I heard the same thing happen in a major Supreme Court case that Ohio was sued at. And even some of the Republicans that are working on that case were kind of almost sad that they didn't get. But, you know, it's a combative system. And so that's something I've learned. And the other thing is, you know, you can make fun of us for the lines that we're having, but, you know, we still have all these options to vote that other places don't have. So how do you kind of keep that all in mind and create a scorecard? And then how do you model early voting? Because if you just model a Poisson or a non-homogeneous Poisson process, a regular one, it's not going to have enough variability to predict these lines. So it's kind of an issue. And there's more attention that can be given to that issue. And I think it's an important issue. It's a critical question. It's like, if you can't run early voting well, then maybe you shouldn't do it at all, but then that's not good. So anyway, it's kind of confusing. So then the next project we did is we worked for the county here with a bunch of students, and here are the students, and I'm very impressive. All these students are great, I think. And some of the Glenn students as well, Glenn interns are called. And Glenn School is our public policy school course. And then we basically benchmarked all the different equipment. And there really aren't very many vendors of election equipment in the United States. These are pretty much all the ones here. And we did it on a bunch of different categories. We brought the vendors in, looked at all their stuff, and including security, which was kind of exciting. And this is just the first part of that work. And then we helped them decide that they decided to pick ES&S again, which is the biggest vendor. And it was an upgrade, and that's what we're using now. So people are using that now. Then we did a project where we tried to redesign the provisional vote counting system, which is quite complicated. I could show a flow diagram. It's very complicated. So when you vote provisionally, so if you go to the place and they say, you're not registered, then you have to vote provisionally. That does get counted eventually, and it goes through a system. It might not get counted if certain conditions are met. And so that takes time. And that you know, if you're worried about the time after when election day happens and when the votes are counted, it's really a system like this. And so these students got certified themselves and participated a little bit. And then they actually came up with some suggestions that I think some of them might have been implemented that can save, you know, about 60% of the time. So if you want to push that time period, that you could use these ideas. Pretty exciting. And actually, all these student projects are, I think some of them are going to be published in some books. Not by me, but other people publishing. So then I worked for Michigan and for the Democrats in Michigan and the Philip Randolph Institute. And the Black people used to be voting 75% straight ticket. And there's a lot of reasons that we discovered about why that's happening. And overall, it's only 50%. And they already had longer lines, and we know why that is too. So the Republicans then made the straight ticket voting illegal, like it is here in, I think it's illegal in Ohio too. But there it was a bigger deal. And it basically just made it take longer. And just like I mentioned, that the longer the ballot, the longer service time, then the more long lines you're going to have. So they inflicted longer lines on everyone. But the question is, how much differentially Black people? And so then I measured, we actually ran, I didn't know that this was going to happen, but the lawsuit in Philip Randolph Institute asked me to design a situation. And I think it was about 20-something, 25 maybe locations. We had volunteers and they collected data in the 2016 election. And these are some of the data about how long it takes to vote and how many long the lines were at different times. And basically, I modeled the whole thing, and I predicted that 10 times the lines would be longer for Black people. And it has to do with how dutiful they are. There's a bunch of reasons. But we initially won, but then the Supreme Court of the United States shut us down. And now it's illegal to vote. So we did that project. Then we did this project here, working again with the Franklin County people. and they were getting ready to spend $500,000 of your tax money to put in another layer of their warehouse. But I think we convinced them, I hope we convinced them, they seem to be convinced that they didn't need to do that, that actually they could just invest in better carts. And this is the cart that our students designed that they can actually build with their shop, that's just taller and also more secure. And they all students also suggested a better layout. And so it was pretty successful, I think. This was just recently. Okay, so now the last question has to do with vote by mail. So Laura, would you open that, please? So this question is, which is more expensive, vote by mail or these other things?
And I think this year, some of the question has to do with which is safer in the middle of a pandemic. Do people feel safe that their vote will actually be counted if it comes in via mail? I'm really curious to see how our audience responds to this.
Well, if there's enough lawsuits, it could be, either side could be more expensive.
That's right. We're going to give it just maybe 20 more seconds to close out the polls. We're getting a lot of great responses. Okay, let's see how we voted.
Okay, well, most of you are wrong. Sorry, I didn't know this either. When we did the benchmarking activity, I didn't know that I don't know why it occurred to me, ask the election officials who really run the thing and know the real cost because they paid the darn bills. What is more expensive and what do you want to do? And the Democrats and Republicans, and not just in Franklin County, I've talked to some other people as well. They're like, it's cheaper and better. We wish we would vote by mail. And I was like, really? Because I mean, it's like they spent all this time. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute. But it turns out, right here, if you think about it, it's kind of obviously more expensive what we're doing now. Is we are voting by mail, so we print out all the things for that. Then when you come in, we then have to. Well, I'll show you all the things you have to do. But here's why. So vote by mail immediately was supported by both party advocates that I talked to. I mean, it wasn't a controversial thing as far as I can tell until President Trump made it sort of controversial-ish. It's cheaper. Not in every place. There are some places where it's been more expensive, but here it's a lot cheaper. Then better paper trail than what we had before. Because now the machines we decide to buy, you have to have a barcode reader to see how you voted when you got the piece of paper. So it's not as good paper trail. Then the bottom line is the states that are doing it have 12% higher turnout in the last election. That's pretty strong statistic. So, and it's also supported by kind of a lean analysis. That was one of my points that I made. That if you diagram a kind of simplified version of the poll workers and what their journey and all the things they do, and the voters and what they do, and what the election staff does, the permanent staff, it's a lot of stuff. And then if you diagram the same journey for the for vote by mail, it's just a lot less stuff. There's a lot fewer steps. I mean, there's simply no poll worker journey at all. And there's no recruiting any polling locations at all. You don't have to rent the polling locations. So you don't have to train the poll workers. I mean, there's a lot of benefits from a cost point of view. And I didn't know that. I admit, just like many of you, I would not have known that. I don't know why, but now that I see it. So a surprising number of US people move every year. That's a thing that a lot of people don't know. Because, those of us who just stay in the same place forever, it was hard to appreciate that 14% of people are moving every single year, particularly young people, obviously. And, the Oregon governor and I and everyone else that I know say that automatic voter registration is key if you're going to do vote by mail. And so there are some security issues, and maybe the biggest issue has to do with some of the things being thrown out because of the signatures. So, so I guess just to review, I've gone through all my story of all the different projects I've worked on in voting. Hopefully you got some sense of what it's like to work in this domain, and I'm happy if anybody else wants to do it too. And then, there's a lot of engineering. I mean, there's a lot of decisions, and it's just like a lot of other systems that we work in. and much more work is needed. I mean, our system is not that great, really. I mean, compared to maybe what it could be. And we have every single county potentially could do things differently, although they don't mostly. And so it's a complicated situation. So obviously, please vote, and I'm done. Thank you. Laura?
Thank you, Dr. Allen. We really appreciate all of your personal insight, but also all the data. I know our engineers out there are probably just eating that up. So at this point, we definitely want to turn things over to conversation with the audience. And I want to thank those of you who submitted questions in advance. We got a lot of really good questions, a lot around election security, which we will start with. But for those of you who are in the audience right now, if you do have a question, please feel free to enter that in the Q&A, and we will get to those shortly. So Ted, let's start with a question from Margaret Van Larsik. And Margaret, I apologize if I have mispronounced your name. She is an alum from our civil engineering department. And she asks, in an ideal situation, how secure can the voting process be, and how close are we to that ideal?
Well, I think that, I've talked to a bunch of other people who are election officials and also election experts. And most of us think that the process is pretty good right now, and it's gotten a lot better because the Department of Homeland Security and the Army have actually done a lot to protect us. Not the Army, but the DoD in general. And then we've had this new machines, and so if you keep everything offline like we pretty much do for the critical path of the voters, which we do now, and you for the votes, you don't have anything online and things air gapped, and you maintain control of custody like you can easily do in vote by mail. I mean, it's possible that people could interfere with the mail, or they could potentially receive faulty. But if you keep your registration database up to date and you do vote by mail, it's very easy to police the chain of custody. It has to do with the voter registration data. So that's pretty ideal, I would think. The current approach where we vote a lot in person, then you got to be careful that you don't leave the equipment around for people to mess with, which we have been sort of doing. And then also, another part of an ideal process is the voter registration is online, and it used to be people hacked it. Like people literally hacked the voter registration. They could change the voter registration. Now, from what I understand, people have hacked the voter registration databases, but I haven't heard people have changed the voter registration, which is good. So I think that we've taken a step towards more secure voter registration in a big way since 2016. Georgia was just asking for trouble, and they got trouble. And so that seems to be over. So I would say that vote by mail really works pretty well. It's pretty ideal. If they clean up the voter registration with automatic voter registration, some other steps, I think that's pretty ideal in my understanding. I mean, it creates a great paper trail. It's super convenient. It costs less, and 12% more of people vote maybe. So that's pretty good. Does that answer your question?
I think it does. So you started to reference some of the issues with hacking, and we have a question here from Emily Napolitan, who is a grad at the Chemical and Biomolecular Engineering Department. She is asking, how do we use technology to safeguard electronic processes from hackers and improve the efficiency of the voting process?
So just like everybody else, when we run phishing, I also am on the security board for the university. So I have some insight, and I'm also an officer of our Institute for Digital Trust, Cybersecurity and Digital Trust. So I know a bit about cybersecurity. There's still a lot I don't know though. So my sense is that keeping the voting system offline, keeping it up to date, makes it so the DEF CON people can't hack your voting machines while sitting in the parking lot, which they could do 15 years ago or even 10 years ago. So now that the machines are up to date, my impression is that they cannot hack them without direct contact. And then if you maintain the chain of custody, that's pretty good. But I could probably hack, if I was willing to risk felony, some of the machines at the Board of Elections, some of the staff. Now, if you get into staff machines, if you can get in the staff network, you could theoretically interfere with the voter registration database and dealing with the the news networks. You could change the news networks so that you could force them to call things possibly in advance. But I think that, you know, when I, that, so in big counties like Franklin County, they have a good staff, I think, and they're pretty secure. And so the electronic systems now, if you keep up to date and you do a good job, even the NSA probably can't hack you now. That was not true before for a lot of systems. And we've been doing that, but we do have our weakest link counties, and they sometimes get hacked. And we now have the Cyber Defense Force that has sometimes helped our weakest link counties. So does that answer your question?
It sure does. It sure does. So we've got some questions coming in from the audience live now, and I will start with this one from Kathy Fox. Hi, Kathy. I know you come to a lot of our events. We're really excited to see you here today. Kathy's an alum of the Knowlton School of Architecture. So Kathy says that some critics say our new voting machines that convert the selections a voter makes into a QR code is unsafe or, again, subject to hacking via the programming code. So if you have any response to that the voter could vote for a different candidate than what the QR code is actually showing.
Yeah, I think that's a bummer. And we rated that lower when we started that, and that's not a good thing. But on the other hand, you know, there's only 4 major vendors and really only a few. And, you know, they don't make a ton of money from voting. The whole market is only a few hundreds of millions, which, so, you know, it's one of those situations where it's not like the market is doing a perfect job. It's not. When we look, that was a bummer, and we didn't like that. We wanted that, but so does that answer the question? But considering all the other considerations, cost and other amenities, the still seem to be the best.
Thank you. So I'd like to take a step back to something that you talked about a little early on your presentation. This is a question from Lee Nicely, another alum, who wonders if you could talk a little bit about, you mentioned that the unequal voting lines had to do with the length of a ballot. If you could talk about why a ballot would be longer versus shorter.
Sure. Most people wouldn't know that. Most people don't. The laws used to say that everybody was only allowed 5 minutes in the machines. But then we were timing, and the average was 7.5 minutes. So that was bad. And then we noticed that some of them were taking on average 12.5 minutes, and others were taking about 7. It's almost twice as long. And that's because some people have local issues, like the library levy and the smoking in their local, you know, like we had in Upper Arlington, we raised a lot of money for our schools. And so some people spend a lot of time and make the ballots long by doing these petitions. And then they also make them uneven. And so, you know, so you have 24 races, then you might have 3 state races, and then you might have, you know, 11 local issues. And that is where it is. Now, there's some regulations to keep the text sort of short. And right now, I think we don't have any, we have only one, we don't have very many issues in this election, partly because I guess it was hard to get all the signatures because of COVID. So does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. I'm just filtering through. We've got a lot of great questions coming in. There's a bigger picture question from Jim, who is a chemical engineering alum, who wants to know a little bit if you could talk about the potential for the outcome of an election to have bias depending on how the process is set up. I know you addressed that in a broad way with some of the specific projects that you were working on, but if you could just maybe speak to that again a little bit.
Yeah, well, so I mean, if you're a dastardly person that thought that if you're a dastardly, you know, a party, and you wanted to disenfranchise your enemies, there's a lot of things you can do. You can inflict lines on them. You can make it hard for their people to vote because you pick the different. You know, all of us, most of us have driver's licenses, but a lot of people don't. And you pick the types of IDs they have and you make them illegal. That's pretty mean. And then you can also dial up your signature machines to make it harder for their signatures to get counted. And then you can also take away the resources that do what's called curing the signatures. So I've noticed that my vote has been counted. I saw that I voted early and it was counted. But if it hadn't been counted, they're supposed to call me up and say, why, you know, what do you want to do? But if they don't have the resources, then you can take those resources away. So I'm not trying to say, I'm just trying to say, I think that these are the kinds of things you can do. The people in Georgia, the current governor of Georgia, when he was the Secretary of State, seems to have pioneered a long list of ways to try to disenfranchise his enemies, and put them all in place at once. So if you want to try to use technology to cheat an election, I think a good manual would be to study the 2016 election in Georgia. Those guys, and also what the people in North Carolina, the case I tried to work on, they were systematic. I mean, they were pretty bad. I don't mean to, I'm sorry to laugh at such an important thing, but I just want to say that it is odd to see people put so much energy into something that just seems so on its face immoral and wrong. And I'm sorry if I've contributed to that sometimes and being so happy about it. I apologize.
So I think we have one final question, and this is from James Riedel, who asks, given your experience and the research that you've done, what do you think would be the best thing that states could do to improve the voting process?
Yeah, I think actually House Bill 1 is a very impressive thing. It's already been passed by the federal Congress. They have mandatory voter registration, automatic registration. That's so important because so many people get discouraged when they go and they have to vote provisionally, or they just feel humiliated when they are turned away. Then vote by mail is a great option. I mean, hopefully I won't be proven wrong by something I can't predict, but so many places have been voting by mail successfully since the 80s that it seems like a pretty safe thing to do. But of course, theoretically might not be. Some places are even voting online, in Canada and Estonia, but I would think that those would be places and issues that are not as controversial. And to do it by online, we'd have to have really strong identifiers and maybe some kind of blockchain to make sure it couldn't be stopped, and ways to check, but other people couldn't check. It would require a level of technology beyond, even the current driver's license requirements that are going up this next year. They might not be good enough. I don't know.
Well, thank you, Dr. Allen. And I want to thank all the audience members who have joined us today and who submitted their questions. We unfortunately couldn't get to all of them, but Dr. Allen has agreed to answer the questions that we couldn't get to today. So we'll be following up and sending those to you via email. I do want to say, I think one of the main takeaways from today's conversation is, if you have not already done so, we definitely encourage you to exercise your right to vote in this election. And make your opinions heard. That's very important. So I hope you'll do that. As we move forward, I want to make sure that you are aware of all the different ways that you can stay connected with us here as a college. So if there was anything that you heard about tonight, either from Dr. Allen, or maybe you want to know a little bit more about what's going on at the college right now, please reach out to me directly. My information is on the screen. I am happy to put you in contact and get you the information that you're looking for. And as I mentioned, we have a whole slate of different ways that you can stay connected. So first, we're going to be sending you a roster of those people who attended tonight and who wanted to share their information with fellow alumni and friends so that you could continue to network with each other outside of this virtual space. Unfortunately, that's one of the downsides of these virtual gatherings, is we can't network in the same way. But our hope is that when you get this roster, you'll use it, you'll reach out to somebody and make a connection with one of your fellow alumni or friends of the college. We're also going to be sending you a survey about today's events, and I would definitely encourage you to use that to share your opinion with us about what kinds of virtual activities would be useful for you. What is it you want to hear from the college? What would be valuable to you right now in your day-to-day life? Those are the kinds of programs and activities we want to put together for you, and we can't do that on our own. So please share your opinion when you get that survey. And as you can see on the screen now, we have a handful of virtual activities coming up in the coming days and weeks. Just to walk through those really quickly, tomorrow at 4 o'clock, you can join us for a special event around the Bridge Street district in Dublin. That's that area between historic Dublin and the New Bridge Park, including the pedestrian link bridge that's crossing the river. So we will be hearing from 2 key alumni from the college who were involved in the design, implementation, and future of that project. It's going to be a really great conversation. Then on Sunday, November 15th, if you have ever wondered what would happen when you gather students from around the university and across the nation together for 42 hours in our first ever virtual hackathon, where they're going to work together to come up with coded applications to solve problems and challenges, this is your opportunity to see it firsthand. So during that final countdown event, you're going to see the top 10 teams from this year's hackathon, and you'll have the opportunity to vote for your favorite in the Buckeye Choice category. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and you'll get to see some of the amazing students we have here right now. And then on November 17th, we are presenting our first Engineering Cures for Cancer event. So I'm very excited to announce that for those of you who may not have heard yet, the College of Engineering has entered a partnership with the Comprehensive Cancer Center to form the new Center for Cancer Engineering here at Ohio State. And so at this event, Dean Williams is going to showcase the work of 3 researchers who are currently working in that center on life-changing work around the prevention, detection, and treatment of cancer. So I would definitely encourage you to participate. I think we all know somebody who has been impacted by cancer, if not your own personal situation. So again, more information about those events, and you can register online on the college's website for events, which you can see right at the top of that page. Another exciting thing that we are about to launch this fall is our Pay Forward Triple Match program. This is where alumni who have graduated within the past 10 years can make a donation to any area within the College of Engineering, and that donation will be tripled thanks to the leadership and generosity of some of our more senior alumni who have graduated more than 10 years ago. So if you are a younger alum, or maybe you've graduated more than 10 years ago, but you would like to figure out how you could support that program maybe in the future and help triple some of those gifts that we're getting, please check that out. go.osu.edu/triple 2020. That'll be launching very soon, and we're really excited to spread the word about that program. Last but definitely not least, if you would like to continue to stay connected with the college, we share the latest research and news on our social media channels regularly. There are several posts throughout the week. So if you don't already do so, I would encourage you to follow any of these channels that you wish to engage with. It's also one of the first ways that we spread the word about upcoming events like this one. So again, on behalf of myself, thank you to Dr. Allen. Thank you for joining us. Go out and vote and have a great evening.